You were not born afraid of your own power. You learned it slowly, silently, as the world began to whisper that softness is weakness, that gentleness must apologize, that to be loved you must dim your light. You were born whole, luminous, wild, instinctive, but somewhere between the innocence of the child and the expectations of the woman. Something sacred was exiled. They told you to smile when you wanted to scream, to be agreeable when your intuition said no, to forgive before you even felt the wound. And so, piece by piece, you began to hide your rage, your hunger, your sensuality, your knowing. You learned to shrink yourself, to smooth your edges, to make yourself digestible. But the body never forgets what the mind denies. Deep within, in the silent corridors of your unconscious, a shadow began to take shape, a woman made of everything you were forced to bury. She is the one who holds your tears when you pretend to be fine. She is the one who dreams when you play it safe. She is the one who rages when you say, "I'm okay." And though you may call her shame, or fear, or madness, she is none of these. She is your forgotten wholeness, waiting for you to return. This is not about becoming something new. It is about remembering what you already are. Shadow work is not self-improvement. It is self-remembrance. It is walking back through the underworld of your own psyche to reclaim the parts you were taught to abandon, because the feminine shadow is not evil. It is sacred. It is the wild pulse of life that patriarchy, trauma, and fear tried to domesticate. And until you face her, the woman you exiled, you will live only half a life, haunted by the echo of what you could have been. Asterisk, if these words already stir something ancient within you, if they remind you of a truth you've almost forgotten, then take a breath and stay. What you're about to hear is not advice. It's a mirror. If you find meaning in this journey, consider giving it light, like share or subscribe, not as a transaction, but as a ritual of remembrance. Each time you do, this message travels further, reaching another woman who needs to hear what you once needed to know, that her darkness is not her enemy, but her doorway back to the soul. Asterisk, there was a time when you did not question your worth. You laughed too loud, cried too easily, spoke too honestly, and the world had not yet taught you that these things were dangerous. You were still whole then, still instinctive. You danced when you felt joy, withdrew when you needed silence, trusted your hunger as much as your kindness. You lived close to the pulse of life itself, raw, unfiltered, unashamed. But every wild creature that enters civilization learns the same lesson. The price of belonging is obedience. You learned early that the world rewards the girl who behaves. She smiles at the right time, suppresses her rage, hides her longing. She becomes pleasing, accommodating, light, and in return, she is loved, or at least accepted. But that acceptance is conditional. It depends on your ability to bury the very parts of yourself that make you real. So you learned to edit your being. You became fluent in self-abandonment when your anger was punished. You called it overreaction when your intuition was dismissed. You called it overthinking when your desire was shamed. You called it too much, and each time you turned away from your own truth, something in you dimmed a quiet grief that had no language. This is where the feminine shadow begins, not in sin, not in evil, but in silence. It begins the moment you internalize the world's rejection of your wholeness. Jung called this process the formation of the persona, the mask you wear to survive. It is not false, not at first. It is protective. a temporary skin that allows you to move safely through a world that cannot hold your fullness. But over time, the mask begins to harden. You forget where it ends and you begin. You confuse approval for love, performance for authenticity. You become the good woman, the archetype society celebrates, and the soul mourns. She is efficient, kind, self-sacrificing, endlessly giving. She nurtures everyone but herself. She feels guilty when she rests, ashamed when she desires, unworthy when she shines. And yet, even as she plays her role perfectly, something in her still aches, a quiet, unbearable knowing that she has betrayed herself, in Jungian language. This ache is the tension of opposites, the soul's revolt against the prison of the persona. The psyche cannot tolerate falseness for long. Whatever is repressed seeks return. Whatever is denied gathers power in the unconscious until it begins to knock. The shadow is that knocking. It comes first as irritation, then anxiety, then fatigue, until one day you wake up and realize you no longer know who you are beneath all the roles you've played. You scroll through your life like a stranger, reading someone else's story. You smile in photos that don't feel like memories. You say you're fine, but you're numb. This numbness is not depression. It's the soul's anesthesia, a temporary stillness before the return of everything you've avoided. It is the psyche's way of saying, stop pretending. It's time, because the woman you abandoned never died. She has been waiting in the dark, not with resentment, but with patience. She waits for you in your dreams, in your triggers, in the moments when you cry for no reason. You meet her every time you feel a sudden wave of emotion that doesn't fit the situation. That is her voice calling you back. But most of us mistake that voice for weakness. We try to fix it, silence it, rationalize it. We chase productivity, distraction, and external validation, hoping the ache will disappear. But shadow work is the opposite of fixing it, is the art of listening. It asks you to stop running long enough to hear what your pain is trying to say. Jung wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. To make the darkness conscious is to turn toward the forgotten self, the one who was told she was too sensitive, too emotional, too strange. It is to realize that your sensitivity is not a flaw, but your gift. That your emotions are not chaos, but compass. That your strangeness is not something to hide, but the signature of your soul. The shadow is not your enemy, it is your mirror. It reflects everything you have disowned, but also everything you have yet to claim. Within your suppressed anger lies your boundaries. Within your shame lies your authenticity. Within your fear lies your intuition. The feminine shadow is both wound and wisdom, exile and invitation. And so the work begins, not by striving to become better, but by remembering who you were before you believed you weren't enough. You cannot heal what you continue to judge. You cannot integrate what you continue to exile. The first act of shadow work is radical compassion, to sit beside your hidden self and say, I see you. I remember you. You are allowed to exist, because the truth is this: every time you reject a part of yourself, you reject life itself. The feminine shadow holds not only your pain, but your power, your sensuality, your intuition, your wildness. She is not a ghost to banish. She is the root of your becoming. You have spent years trying to be the light. Now it is time to meet what lives in the dark. Asterisk, the shadow is not born in darkness. It is born in light, in the bright glare of what the world calls good. You learn early what is acceptable and what is not. and everything that doesn't fit is quietly sent away. But the psyche does not erase, it hides. And what is hidden does not die, it waits. When you swallow your anger, it doesn't dissolve. It descends. It turns inward, becoming self-criticism, exhaustion, or the quiet rage you feel toward yourself for not being enough. When you repress desire, it becomes envy, the ache you feel when you watch someone else live with the freedom you've denied yourself. When you silence your intuition, it mutates into anxiety, the mind's desperate attempt to do what the body already knows. This is the feminine shadow in motion, shape-shifting, restless, seeking to be seen. It leaks through your tone when you say, "I'm fine." It hides behind perfectionism, people-pleasing, overthinking, and the need to control. It lives in the tightness of your chest when you say yes but mean no. It lives in the smile you give when something inside you is screaming. But none of this makes you broken. These are the side effects of survival. When your authenticity was unsafe, your psyche created defenses. Jung called them complexes, autonomous fragments of the psyche that carry the energy of what was once repressed. You don't choose them. They act through you. The woman who once couldn't express anger now attracts partners who do it for her. The woman who fears her own power unconsciously sabotages every opportunity to use it. The shadow always finds a way to speak, even when you won't. And yet, there's a strange mercy in this chaos. The shadow doesn't just sabotage, it saves. It keeps what you've exiled alive until you're ready to reclaim it. Every breakdown, every outburst, every irrational fear is a messenger carrying the fragments of your forgotten self. But because the language of the unconscious is symbolic, the message comes wrapped in paradox. The thing you resist most is the thing you need most. You were taught that anger is dangerous, but anger is the guardian of your boundaries. It arises not to destroy, but to protect. Beneath its fire is the voice that says, "No more." You were told desire is shameful, but desire is the compass of your soul, the magnet pulling you toward what is alive. Beneath the shame is the truth. You want more because you are meant for more. You were told intuition is irrational, but intuition is ancient intelligence, the silent knowing of your body, older than logic itself. Beneath the doubt lies a wisdom that never left you. You simply stopped listening. The feminine shadow is made of these suppressed forces: love that wasn't safe to express, rage that wasn't allowed to breathe, knowing that wasn't given permission to speak. When they can no longer stay buried, they surface as projection. You begin to see your disowned qualities in others. You envy the confident woman because she mirrors the part of you that longs to be free. You judge the emotional woman because she mirrors the part of you that longs to be seen. Projection is not failure. It's the psyche's mirror trick. What you refuse to see in yourself, life will show you through others, again and again, until you recognize your reflection. Jung called this the mirroring function of the unconscious. It is the world's way of saying, you cannot escape yourself. And so you begin to notice the patterns. The friend who drains you, the lover who dismisses you, the job that never fulfills you, all of them mirrors. All of them lessons. The outer world becomes a map of your inner exile. Shadow work begins the moment you stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and start asking, "What in me is being shown?" This shift is everything, because until you own your shadow, you will remain its victim. But the moment you face it, you reclaim your power. It is terrifying at first to see your own darkness, your jealousy, your resentment, your hunger. your manipulations, and realize they are not mistakes, but messages. They are not signs of your unworthiness, but of your humanity. The shadow's function is not to humiliate you. It is to humanize you, to make you whole. The psyche is not moral, it is symbolic. It does not divide you into good and bad. It asks only for integration. When you accept the shadow, you begin to see that even your flaws are made of divine material. Your jealousy is your desire to create. Your insecurity is your longing for love. Your rage is your cry for justice. There is no darkness that does not contain light. There is no shadow that does not trace back to the sun, and yet the path forward is not easy. The moment you begin to see your shadow, it fights to remain unseen. You may feel guilt, fear, confusion, the old conditioning rising to pull you back into silence. But something in you has already awakened, and once the eyes of the soul open, they cannot unsee. The birth of the shadow is the beginning of truth. It is the moment you stop running from yourself. It is the first crack in the illusion of who you thought you had to be. And through that crack, light begins to enter. Not the light of perfection, but the light of awareness. You begin to sense that the darkness you feared is not a void, but a womb. Something ancient is gestating within you. The descent has begun. Asterisk, you cannot rise without first falling. Every woman who begins the work of healing eventually meets the darkness she has tried to avoid, and it feels, at first, like dying. The descent begins quietly, disguised as exhaustion, disillusionment, or the sudden collapse of everything that once made sense. You lose interest in the life you built, not because you are broken, but because the false self can no longer hold your truth. This is the sacred descent, what Jung called the night sea journey. It is the moment when consciousness sinks into the depths to reclaim what was lost. In mythology, every heroine must pass through it. Inanna descends into the underworld, stripping away her jewels and garments at each gate. Persephone is pulled into the dark by the unseen god. Psyche must wander through the shadows to find love again. These myths are not just stories, they are psychological maps of your own initiation. Because at some point, every woman must meet her shadow face to face. You descend not into hell, but into your own hidden truth. At first, you resist. You cling to the light, to logic, to the illusion of control. But the underworld has its own gravity. You begin to dream vividly, the archetypal language of the unconscious emerging like smoke from beneath the surface. You dream of serpents, of wild forests, of broken mirrors. You wake with a heaviness that feels ancient. This is not madness. This is memory. The body remembers what the mind denies. The psyche speaks through symbols because words are too small for what must be said in this darkness. You meet her, the dark feminine. She wears many faces, depending on what you have exiled. For some, she appears as the witch, the one who knows without proof, the woman who was burned for her intuition. You feel her presence when your instincts rise, but you silence them, when you know something is wrong but choose compliance. The witch is your knowing self, feared, suppressed, misunderstood. She whispers, trust what you feel, even when no one else believes you. For others, she comes as the wild woman, untamed, sensual, unapologetically alive. She is the rhythm you repress, the hunger you shame, the ecstasy you deny. She dances barefoot through your blood, reminding you that the body is not your prison, it is your temple. She says, your desire is holy. Your pleasure is prayer. And sometimes she arrives as the Medusa, terrifying, misunderstood, powerful. Once a woman of beauty and innocence, violated and cursed, she turns men to stone with her gaze. Medusa is the rage you are not allowed to feel, the sacred fury of the violated feminine. She says, your anger is sacred. It is not violence. It is truth demanding to be seen. Each archetype is a fragment of you, an aspect of the feminine psyche that patriarchy taught you to fear. Together, they form a chorus calling you back to wholeness. They are not here to destroy you, but to free you. Yet, to meet them, you must be willing to sit in discomfort, to let old emotions rise, to face the parts of yourself that do not look beautiful or polite. At first, this confrontation feels unbearable. The witch confronts your doubt. The wild woman exposes your shame. The Medusa makes you tremble before your own power. You may want to retreat, to escape back into the light of spiritual bypassing, the comfort of affirmation, the illusion that healing can be gentle. But shadow work is not gentle. It is surgical. You will feel grief for the years you spent exiled from yourself. You will feel rage for every time you silenced your own voice. You will feel longing for the freedom you once feared to claim. Let them come. Feel them fully. The dark feminine does not destroy. She purifies. She burns away everything false until only truth remains. In Jung's language, this is enantiodromia, the turning of one thing into its opposite, the moment when repression becomes revelation. What you feared as darkness reveals itself as light in disguise. The witch's intuition becomes your compass. The wild woman's passion becomes your vitality. The Medusa's rage becomes your power to protect what is sacred. Through this descent, you discover that the underworld is not a place of punishment, but of transformation. It is the womb of renewal, where the fragments of the psyche begin to rearrange themselves into something whole. And then, in the stillness after the storm, something miraculous happens. You begin to feel a quiet peace beneath the chaos, a still point, as if your soul had been waiting for you to finally arrive. You realize that what you feared most was never the darkness itself, but your own depth. The descent is not the end. It is the threshold. To meet the dark feminine is to reclaim the lost language of your being, the primal, intuitive, embodied wisdom that lives beyond words. She does not ask you to be perfect. She asks you to be real. You do not escape the underworld. You integrate it. You learn to walk with both light and dark, love and rage, creation and destruction, all within you, all sacred. And when you rise again, you are no longer the same woman who descended. Something ancient in you has awakened. You are no longer seeking permission to exist. You are remembering that you already belong. The descent was never meant to end in darkness. It was meant to prepare you for the light you once feared. Now you stand in the half-light between worlds, not who you were, not yet who you will be, and you realize that healing is not a moment, but a movement, an alchemical process of transmutation. What was once poison becomes medicine. What was once shadow becomes substance. Integration is not about erasing the past or forgiving too quickly. It is about learning to hold the contradictions within you without splitting apart. You can be strong and vulnerable, gentle and fierce, forgiving and uncompromising. Wholeness is not purity. It is complexity made conscious. It is the capacity to say, this too is me. When Jung spoke of individuation, he did not mean becoming perfect. He meant becoming whole, a union of opposites that allows life to move through you freely. In alchemy, lead is turned into gold through fire. In psychology, the lead of your pain is transformed through awareness. Every emotion you once repressed becomes energy available for creation. Anger, once feared, becomes your backbone, the fire that protects your boundaries. Desire, once shamed, becomes your compass, guiding you toward what is alive. Grief, once avoided, becomes your teacher, opening you to compassion. Even fear becomes a friend, a signal that something sacred is approaching. You begin to see how every relationship mirrors your own inner dynamics. The partner who dismisses you echoes the part of you that still dismisses yourself. The friend who crosses your boundaries reflects the part of you that still believes you must earn love by endurance. Through this lens, conflict becomes classroom, pain becomes professor. You stop asking for a life without suffering and start asking for the pre-strength to meet suffering with awareness. Integration is felt first in the body. There is a soft loosening in the chest, a slow return of breath. You no longer rush to explain yourself. You listen to your own rhythm. Some days you move forward, others you simply sit in stillness. The old self still whispers, but now you recognize her voice, the echo of an old defense, not a command. In these moments, you realize that wholeness is not a destination, but a practice. You tend to your inner life as one tends a garden, pulling weeds of self-doubt, watering the seeds of truth. Some flowers bloom overnight, others take years, but the soil is yours again. You belong to your own ground. Slowly, you begin to create from this new center. The art you make, the words you speak, the boundaries you set, all carry the signature of integration. You no longer seek to impress. You seek to express. You no longer perform love. You embody it. Your presence itself becomes medicine, for you radiate the peace of someone who has met their own darkness and found grace there. Still, integration demands humility. The shadow does not disappear. It integrates into a larger pattern. You will still fall into old fears, still forget your worth, still hear the voices of doubt rise. But now you recognize them as visitors, not rulers. You invite them to sit, listen, and leave in their own time. This is the alchemy of wholeness, transformation through relationship, not repression. Wholeness changes how you love. You no longer seek completion in another. You meet them as a mirror, not a missing piece. You no longer fear vulnerability. You see it as strength. The feminine that was once wounded by dependence and domestication now learns sovereignty, not independence born of defense, but autonomy rooted in truth. And the more you live from this truth, the more you see that the world around you changes. Because when a woman integrates her shadow, she no longer feeds the collective wound. She stops playing the roles that keep others asleep. She becomes a mirror of possibility, a living proof that wholeness is contagious. Integration is not a private victory. It is a ripple. When you own your voice, other women remember theirs. When you forgive your past, you soften the world's future. Every act of self-honesty becomes a prayer for a collective awakening. The alchemist does not conquer fire. She partners with it. So too do you learn to dance with your shadow, not to control it, but to create with it. It becomes the spark in your art, the depth in your love, the strength in your boundaries. You begin to see that your shadow was never a curse. It was your creative force misunderstood. And so, the woman who once feared her darkness now walks with it at her side. Not as a burden, but as a companion. She has learned the language of the underworld and can translate its symbols into wisdom. She no longer asks, "When will I be healed?" but rather, how can I live honestly with what I am? This is the alchemy of wholeness, the moment when you realize you were never broken, only divided. And now, the pieces have found each other again. Asterisk, there comes a quiet morning when the storm no longer defines you. The sky is still grey, the world still imperfect, yet something within you has shifted. You move slower now, not from exhaustion, but from reverence. The war between who you were and who you are becoming has ended. This is not triumph in the way the world imagines it. No applause, no revelation of wings. It is simpler. It is peace. A kind of peace that arrives when you stop trying to become and begin to remember. Because beneath all your searching, all your self-help, all your spiritual striving, you were never broken. You were simply asleep to your own wholeness. And now, awakening feels less like conquest and more like coming home. You begin to remember the woman beneath the conditioning, the one who laughed without permission, who trusted her instincts, who could feel the sacred in the ordinary. You remember the girl who danced before she was told to sit still, who dreamed before the world taught her to shrink. And as you remember her, you realize she never left. She was waiting behind every mask you wore. This is the return, not to the past, but to your essence. You walk back through the ruins of your old identity, touching the walls with gratitude. The masks that once imprisoned you now lie on the floor like relics of an ancient life. You do not despise them. They protected you once. They helped you survive a world that did not yet know how to honor the feminine soul. But survival is no longer enough. You were not meant to remain in the underworld forever. The descent taught you depth. The darkness gave you sight. But the world above needs your light now, not the polished light of performance, but the grounded glow of authenticity. You return to the village, not as the wounded girl, nor as the savior, but as the bridge between worlds. You carry the medicine of the shadow in one hand, and the clarity of consciousness in the other. Your voice no longer trembles when you speak truth. You do not rush to fix others. You simply stand, and your presence becomes a mirror for their own awakening. Jung called this stage the return to the self, the completion of the individuation cycle. But completion is not an ending. It is a new beginning, because wholeness does not isolate you from life. It binds you more deeply to it. You find beauty in the ordinary again, the sound of your breath, the morning light on your hands, the laughter of a friend who truly sees you. Healing, you discover, is not a grand event, but a daily intimacy, a way of walking through the world with open eyes and an unarmored heart. The woman who remembers has stopped performing peace. She no longer hides behind spiritual language or mystical distance. She knows that real spirituality is found in how she speaks to the barista, how she forgives her mother, how she holds herself in silence when no one is watching. She has learned that enlightenment without embodiment is escape, and she chooses embodiment. She still feels pain, but she no longer builds her home there. She still fears, but she walks with it. She still doubts, but she does not stop moving. Her healing is not the absence of darkness, it is the mastery of light within it, and so she returns to her life, to love, to art, to laughter, to work, carrying everything she has learned in the depths. Her relationships change. She no longer seeks validation, but resonance. She attracts those who speak the same language of presence, who understand that intimacy is not possession, but recognition. She no longer asks to be chosen, because she already chose herself. The woman who remembers no longer runs from her past. She walks beside it, Every wound that once defined her now becomes a doorway, each scar a verse in the story of her becoming. And when she looks in the mirror, she sees not perfection, but truth. Eyes that have seen darkness and did not look away. A face weathered by emotion, softened by compassion. A spirit that has burned and burned again, until it became light. This is the feminine fully realized, not the submissive goddess of idealized mythology, nor the hardened survivor of modernity, but the integrated woman, fierce and kind, grounded and infinite. She belongs neither to heaven nor earth, because she has learned to hold both. And as she steps into the world, she carries a message, not shouted but radiated. You are not too much. You are not too broken. You are not behind. You are remembering, because this journey, the descent, the confrontation, the integration, was never meant just for you. You are a continuation of every woman who came before you, and a spark for every woman who will come after. When you heal, the lineage heals. When you speak truth, the silence breaks. When you live whole, the world reshapes itself in your image. That is the sacred task of the awakened feminine, not to escape the world, but to re-enchant it. Not to transcend the shadow, but to dance with it. Not to seek perfection, but to embody presence. And so you return, not as who you were, but as who you've always been. A woman who remembers. A soul who has seen the darkness, held the pain, and still chooses love. You smile, and for the first time it feels real, because you are not smiling to prove anything. You are smiling because you have finally come home to yourself, and that, Jung would say, is the moment the self recognizes itself, the true individuation. The end of the illusion of separation. You have returned, and this time you are whole. There is a silence that follows awakening, not the silence of emptiness, but the stillness of understanding. You no longer seek to explain, to justify, to prove. You have seen too much to return to the old performance of perfection. The shadow work that once felt like a descent into chaos now reveals itself as the greatest act of love, not toward others, but toward yourself. Because what you truly healed was not your darkness. It was your rejection of it. You begin to see that every woman carries two voices, one that conforms and one that remembers. The first seeks safety, the second seeks truth. And the moment you chose truth over safety, the universe conspired to break everything that was false. That breaking was never punishment. It was preparation. Now you understand why Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. You have taken fate into your hands, not by force, but by awareness. You have descended into the roots of your psyche and reclaimed what was lost, your voice, your intuition, your instinct, your sacred rage, your tenderness. All of it was holy. All of it was you. The feminine shadow is not the enemy of light. It is the womb that gives birth to it. When you dare to meet your darkness without shame, you awaken the very power that can transform it. The serpent becomes wisdom. The wound becomes wisdom. The silence becomes song. And so you rise, not above life, but within it, unafraid of your own depths. You have learned that enlightenment is not the flight of the spirit, but the descent of the soul into the body. To be fully human, fully feeling, fully here. This is the new feminine, not a return to what was, but an evolution of what will be. A woman who has touched her shadow and found herself. A woman who no longer hides behind light, but is the light because she has earned it. So, when the night comes again, and it will, you will not fear it. You will light a candle, close your eyes, and whisper to the dark, I remember.